There's a conversation happening in living rooms across the country right now that nobody wants to have out loud. It's the conversation about what happens when you wake up one morning after 70 and realize that for the first time in decades, maybe for the first time in your entire life, you don't actually owe anyone anything anymore. Not your time, not your energy, not your approval, not your presence, and certainly not your silence about what you truly need. For 50, 60, maybe 70 years, you've been the one everyone leaned on. You raised the children, you supported the spouse, you showed up to every obligation, every expectation, every family gathering where you smiled even when you were exhausted. You were the reliable one, the strong one, the one who never complained. But here's what nobody prepared you for. What happens when all of that finally stops being enough? What happens when you realize that being everyone's rock has left you feeling like gravel? Today, we're going to talk about something most people are afraid to say out loud. We're going to talk about the freedom that comes with finally, unapologetically putting yourself first, not in a selfish way, but in a sacred way. Because your seventh decade and beyond isn't about shrinking into the background, it's about expanding into the most authentic version of yourself you've ever been. And that journey begins with one powerful word: no. Let's start with something that might feel uncomfortable but needs to be said. After 70, one of the most exhausting things you can do is continue living according to rules that were written for someone else's life, not yours. We spend so much of our earlier years following scripts, the script of what a good parent looks like, what a good spouse should tolerate, what a respectable elder is supposed to accept. And somewhere along the way, we forget that we're allowed to put the script down. Think about the obligations that fill your calendar right now. How many of them are there because you genuinely want to do them, and how many are there because you're afraid of what people will think if you don't show up? There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes from doing things out of obligation rather than desire. It's not the tiredness that comes from a good day's work. It's the tiredness that settles into your bones and makes you feel older than you actually are. Here's something that might surprise you. The people who truly love you don't want your exhausted compliance. They want your genuine presence. And if someone only values you when you're saying yes to everything they ask, then what they value isn't actually you, it's your usefulness. And you, my friend, are so much more than useful. You're irreplaceable. But only when you're being authentically yourself, not when you're performing a role that no longer fits. The truth is, after 70, you've earned something that younger people are still chasing: the wisdom to know the difference between what matters and what merely makes noise. You've lived long enough to see that most of the things people worry about don't actually matter in the end. What matters is how you felt, whether you had peace, whether you protected your energy, whether you spent your days doing things that made you feel alive rather than things that made you feel acceptable. So here's the first invitation. Start paying attention to how you feel after you say yes to something. Does it energize you or drain you? Does it bring you closer to peace or further from it? Your body knows the answer even when your mind is still caught up in old patterns of obligation. Trust what your body is telling you. That heaviness in your chest when someone asks for something, that's not guilt, that's wisdom trying to protect you.
Now let's talk about something even more important than your time: your emotional energy. Because the truth is, you can give someone your time and still protect your peace, but you cannot give someone your emotional energy without it costing you something real. And after 70, that cost becomes too high to ignore. There are people in your life right now who drain you. You know exactly who they are. They're the ones who call only when they need something, who turn every conversation back to their own problems, who make you feel tired before the conversation even starts. And here's what's interesting. You probably feel guilty even thinking about creating distance from them, because you've been taught that love means endless availability, that being a good person means accepting everyone's chaos as your own. But that's not love. That's exhaustion wearing a mask. Real love, the kind that sustains you through your later years, requires boundaries. It requires you to be honest about what you can give and what you need to protect. And the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for others, is to stop pretending you have infinite capacity when you don't. Think about the last conversation you had that left you feeling emotionally drained. What was it about that interaction that took so much from you? Was it someone who only saw their perspective? Someone who dismissed your feelings? Someone who turned your support into their endless therapy session without ever asking how you were doing? These patterns don't change on their own. They change when you change your response to them. Here's a phrase that might feel revolutionary. I don't have the energy for that right now. Not I'm too busy, which invites negotiation. Not maybe later, which postpones the drain. Just a simple, honest acknowledgement that your energy is limited and you're choosing to protect it. You don't need to explain further. You don't need to justify your limitations. Your energy belongs to you, and you get to decide how it's spent. The beautiful thing about this stage of life is that you finally understand something that took decades to learn. You can love people from a distance. You can wish them well without being their constant source of support. You can care about their well-being without sacrificing your own. And the people who truly belong in your life will understand this. They'll respect your boundaries because they respect you.
Let's shift now to talk about the places you go, both physical and emotional, that slowly chip away at your sense of self. Because here's something nobody tells you about getting older. Not every space is meant for you anymore. And that's not a limitation, that's liberation. There are rooms you walk into where you immediately feel smaller. Maybe it's a family gathering where everyone talks over you. Maybe it's a community group where your opinions are dismissed because of your age. Maybe it's even a friendship where you're always the one listening, never the one being heard. These spaces have something in common. They don't honor who you are. They tolerate your presence, but they don't celebrate it. After 70, tolerating is no longer good enough. You've spent enough years in rooms where you had to earn your place, where you had to prove your worth, where you had to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. And I want you to hear this clearly. You don't have to do that anymore. Not in your own family, not in your social circles, not anywhere. If a space doesn't honor your dignity, you have absolute permission to leave it. This includes the emotional spaces you revisit in your mind. How many times do you replay old conversations, old hurts, old moments where you wish you'd said something different? How much energy do you spend mentally returning to places that can never be changed? There's a particular kind of prison that comes from constantly revisiting the past, hoping that this time, somehow, it will feel different. But it won't. The past is complete. It's done teaching you. And your job now isn't to fix it. Your job is to release it. Think about the last time you went somewhere out of obligation, even though everything in you said to stay home. What did that cost you? Maybe it was a day of recovery afterward. Maybe it was a week of feeling emotionally off balance. Maybe it was a subtle erosion of your sense of self because you had to perform a version of yourself that doesn't actually exist anymore. These costs add up, and eventually you realize that the price of admission to certain spaces is simply too high. Here's what freedom looks like after 70. It looks like choosing environments that match your energy rather than forcing your energy to match the environment. It looks like walking into rooms where people are genuinely glad you're there, not just being polite. It looks like spending your time in spaces that feel nourishing rather than depleting. And yes, sometimes that means smaller circles, quieter gatherings, more time alone. But alone and lonely are not the same thing. Alone can be peaceful. Lonely is what happens when you're surrounded by people who don't really see you.
Now we need to talk about the most sensitive topic of all, the people in your life who no longer fit who you're becoming. This is delicate territory because we're not talking about cutting people off or being cold. We're talking about honest recognition that some relationships served a season of your life that has now passed. And continuing to force those relationships to work takes more energy than you have to give. There's a particular kind of friend who only knows how to connect through complaint. Every phone call is a recitation of problems. Every visit is a catalog of what's wrong with the world, their health, their family, the government, the weather. And somewhere in the middle of it, you realize you feel heavier after spending time with them than you did before. That's not connection. That's emotional labor disguised as friendship. Then there are the family members who still see you as you were 30 years ago. They've never updated their understanding of who you are. They still make the same assumptions, tell the same stories about you, expect you to play the same role you've always played. And when you try to show them you've changed, they don't see it. They don't want to see it, because your growth requires them to adjust their perspective, and that's work they're not willing to do. Here's what's hard to accept. You cannot force people to see your evolution. You cannot make someone understand who you've become if they're committed to only seeing who you were. And spending your precious energy trying to prove yourself to people who aren't paying attention is one of the saddest wastes of this stage of life. After 70, you need people around you who are curious about your current thoughts, not just your historical role. You need people who ask what you're thinking about now, what you're learning, what brings you joy these days. You need people who see you as a whole human being who's still becoming, not as a fixed monument to the past. And if the people currently in your life can't offer that, you have permission to spend less time with them and more time with people who can. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you wise. Because every hour you spend with someone who diminishes you is an hour you could have spent with someone who celebrates you. Or even better, an hour you could have spent with yourself, in peace, doing something that actually feeds your soul. There's a beautiful kind of solitude that becomes possible in your 70s. It's not the loneliness of being unwanted, it's the peace of being selective. Let's talk about your voice. Not the voice you've used for decades to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to make others comfortable. Let's talk about your real voice, the one that knows what it thinks, the one that has opinions, the one that doesn't need everyone to agree before it speaks. One of the strangest losses that happens as we age is the gradual silencing of our own voice. It happens so slowly we don't even notice. We stop sharing opinions that might create conflict. We hold back thoughts that might make others uncomfortable. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We nod along with ideas we don't actually agree with. And over time, we become so practiced at self-censorship that we almost forget we have our own perspective. But here's the truth. You've earned the right to your opinions. You've lived through enough to have developed perspectives that are uniquely yours. You've seen patterns that younger people haven't lived long enough to recognize. You've witnessed how stories play out over decades, not just in headlines. Your perspective is valuable precisely because it comes from experience, not theory. After 70, one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is permission to disagree, out loud, without apologizing, without softening it with a dozen qualifiers, just honest disagreement when you see things differently. This doesn't mean being argumentative or contrary for its own sake, it means being truthful. And truthfulness, especially from someone with 7 decades of living behind them, is a rare and precious thing. Think about the last time you stayed quiet, even though you had something to say. What stopped you? Was it fear of conflict? Fear of being dismissed? Fear of being seen as difficult or negative? These fears are real, but they're also keeping you trapped in a version of yourself that no longer serves you. The you who needs everyone's approval is exhausted. The you who speaks your truth, regardless of whether others agree, is free. Here's what's liberating. Most of the time, people's reactions to your honesty say more about them than about you. If someone can't handle your perspective, that's information about their capacity for dialogue, not about your worth. If someone dismisses your thoughts because of your age, that's evidence of their limitations, not yours. You don't need to convince anyone of your value. You just need to know it yourself and act accordingly.
So where does all of this leave us? It leaves us standing at the threshold of something most people spend their entire lives searching for, the freedom to simply be, not to perform, not to prove, not to please, just to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. This freedom comes with a particular kind of responsibility, because once you see that you have choices, you can never unsee it. Once you realize that you don't have to say yes to every request, attend every gathering, maintain every relationship, or silence every opinion, you become responsible for the choices you make from that point forward. You can't blame obligation anymore. You can only ask yourself, is this how I want to spend my energy? The years after 70 are not about winding down. They're about stripping away everything that was never really you in the first place. All the expectations you carried that weren't yours. All the roles you played because you thought you had to. All the silences you maintained to keep peace that was never really peaceful. When you release all of that, what remains is the truest version of yourself you've ever been. This is your time to be selective. Selective about where you go, who you spend time with, what you give your energy to, what you allow into your emotional space. Selective not because you're being difficult, but because you finally understand that your time and energy are finite, and they deserve to be spent on what actually matters to you. If there's one thing I hope you take from this today, it's this. You are not obligated to carry what doesn't belong to you anymore. The expectations, the old roles, the relationships that drain you, the environments that diminish you. You can set them down, not with anger or bitterness, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what they need to protect. Your 7th decade and beyond is your chance to live without the weight of everyone else's needs defining your days. It's your chance to wake up and ask, not what does everyone else need from me today, but what do I need to feel peaceful today? And then, remarkably, wonderfully, to actually honor that answer. You've spent enough years taking care of everyone else. This season is for you, for your peace, for your authentic voice, for your selective circle, for your protected energy, for your hard-won wisdom, for your right to say no, for your freedom to finally, at long last, live for yourself. The world will adjust. People will find other sources of support. Life will go on, and you'll discover something beautiful, that when you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you finally become fully yourself to the people who truly matter. And that, more than anything, is worth protecting. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope something here gave you permission to release what you've been carrying for too long. You deserve that freedom, and it's yours whenever you're ready to claim it.